Imagine sitting quietly on a plane, your coffee halfway to your lips, when behind you, two strangers casually dismiss the airline you've poured your life into. These black-owned airlines always cut corners. One says, unaware that the man in seat 32B is not just any passenger, he's the CEO, Jalen Cross, founder of Everreach Air. For years, Jalen has built this airline on a promised dignity, equity, and excellence for all travelers. But now, flying undercover as an ordinary customer, he's forced to confront a painful reality. No survey or report could reveal the unspoken biases that shadow his company and his identity. What happens when the person who built the dream hears the harshest judgments from those who don't know his story? Can excellence alone break through the walls of prejudice? And what does it truly mean to lead when the fight is not just for profits, but for respect, for dignity, for justice? Join us on this emotional journey soaring 37,000 feet above ground, where every seat holds a story and every whispered word can change everything. If you're ready to uncover the truths hidden in the sky, hit like, share, and subscribe. This story will challenge your perspective and open your heart. The coffee cup in his hand trembled slightly, but it wasn't the turbulence. Jalen Cross sat in seat 32B, pressed between a curt, older woman in a beige pantsuit and a younger man wearing oversized headphones. The hum of the jet engine surrounded him, and the overhead light cast a soft glow over his open journal. He had stopped writing mid-sentence. Behind him, two voices, low, white, male, continued their conversation without hesitation. "I'm just saying," the first man muttered. "These black-owned airlines cut corners. Look at the snacks, the leg room. You get what you pay for." "Right," the second replied, chuckling. "It's all image, slick branding, woke marketing, and then crash-level service." Jalen didn't move, didn't flinch, but his hand closed around his pen a little tighter. The words rolled through him like cold air under a closed door. He'd heard worse, far worse, but something about hearing it here, on this plane, on this airline, hit different. Everreach Air, his airline. He'd founded it 12 years ago with a single leased jet, a loan from two black-owned credit unions, and a vow that it would stand for dignity, equity, and service. Not just fly, but fly differently. Fly better. And now, 2 rows behind him, his life's work was being dissected by strangers who had no idea he was in arm's reach. Jalen's throat tightened. He wanted to turn around, to speak, to say, "Excuse me, gentlemen. Everreach has the highest on-time rate of any airline its size. Our pilots train an extra 20% more hours than FAA standards, and our snacks. We actually listen to what passengers want," but he didn't turn. Instead, he breathed, slowly, 1 count in, 3 counts out. Years in the Air Force had taught him restraint. Years in boardrooms had taught him patience. But it was something deeper that steadied him now, his father's voice. "You can't fight every slight with fire. Son, sometimes you stand still so the world moves around you." He let that settle. Then, with calm fingers, he closed the journal, capped his pen, and stared forward. The flight had another 42 minutes. He would not confront them. Not yet. Instead, he remembered why he was here. 3 days earlier, he had stood in Everreach's glass-wrapped headquarters in Atlanta, listening to a room full of executives talk about metrics, customer experience, survey data, social media impressions. But something had been bothering him for weeks. Small inconsistencies. Patterns that didn't show up in graphs. He didn't want more charts. He wanted the truth. So he booked 3 random flights across the country, changed his name to Jonathan Pace, and dressed like a middle-aged project consultant. No blazer, no Rolex, no entourage, just a backpack, worn jeans, and his father's old Timex. This flight, Flight 1823 from Phoenix to Salt Lake City, was the third and final leg, the final test, and here it was, unfolding right behind him. He took another sip of coffee. Bitter. Too bitter. Maybe the guy behind him was right about the snacks. Then he shook his head. No, he wouldn't let anger simplify the truth. There had been moments of light. On his first flight from Denver to Chicago, he'd helped a single mother calm her anxious son while the flight attendant, a woman named Rosa, offered extra apple juice without being asked. On the second flight, from Miami to Dallas, he'd watched a tired crew handle a medical emergency with efficiency and calm. But there had been cracks too. A dismissive gate agent, a lounge attendant who barely looked up, a flight attendant who rolled his eyes when an elderly woman asked for assistance with her oxygen. Jalen wasn't naive. He knew no company was perfect, but Everreach wasn't just any company. It was his story, his struggle, and for some passengers it was their hope. Another comment floated back from behind him. And don't even get me started on the uniforms. Why does every steward look like they're auditioning for a runway show the woman beside Jalen? Elise shifted. She glanced at him, sensing the tension. Her eyes met his, questioning but kind. "You okay?" she asked softly. Jalen forced a small smile. "Yeah, just long day." She nodded and looked away, respectful. The younger guy by the window, Micah, was asleep now, mouth half open, earbuds askew. Jalen looked out the window. Below, the desert faded into dark ridges of mountain. Salt Lake wasn't far, neither was the choice he had to make. Do nothing, and he would keep his cover, complete his mission. Hear the worst and say nothing. Or speak, confront, pull off the mask. He closed his eyes and listened, to the hum of the engine, to the pressure in his chest, and to the voices behind him. Still talking. 3 days earlier, the morning sky over Atlanta had been washed in gray and muted gold. The rain tapped softly against the tall glass windows of the Everreach Air headquarters. From the corner office on the 12th floor, Jalen Cross stood alone, arms crossed as he stared out at the runway in the distance. The conference room behind him buzzed with conversation. His executive team had already started gathering. Laughter from the young marketing director echoed faintly. The CFO's deep voice mingled with the COO's calm southern cadence. Numbers would be discussed, metrics dissected. But Jalen's mind was somewhere else entirely. He watched a white Everreach jet taxi slowly to the gate. For most, it was just another inbound flight. To him, it was a living thread in the fabric of a dream he had stitched together from nothing. A dream that bore his father's fingerprints. A dream that carried weight. A soft knock on the door snapped him back. "Jalen." "We're ready for you," said Marianne Fielding, his chief operating officer. Her voice was calm as always, her presence steady. A woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked curls and quiet authority. She had been by his side since the first hangar lease was signed. Jalen gave a nod, slipped on his blazer, and walked into the conference room. The table was filled, laptops open, tablets blinking, coffee steaming in branded mugs. "Let's get started," he said. Marianne opened with the standard slides. Quarterly revenue up 3%, customer retention holding, new partnerships in Latin America moving forward. On paper, things look strong. Then came the less glossy parts. There's been a subtle shift in our NPS scores, she noted. Nothing sharp, but consistent. The head of data analytics added, engagement sentiment is still positive, but the emotional tone has dipped slightly, especially among first-time flyers. Jalen leaned forward. What about complaints? The team exchanged glances. The CFO spoke first. Still within range, but I'll be honest, there's more feedback about inconsistent service, especially in flight. Define inconsistent. Some flights are excellent, others feel distant, cold. Jalen exhaled slowly. And what are we doing about that? We're implementing a new AI model that maps feedback by crew and time of day. Predictive interventions are already in pilot mode, the marketing director explained. I don't want models, Jalen said softly. The room fell quiet. I want to know what our passengers feel. I want to see what they see. A few eyebrows rose. The head of customer experience cleared her throat. We can schedule some in-depth interviews, maybe a new survey cycle. No. Jalen interrupted. I'm going up myself. Silence. You're flying. He nodded. 3 flights, randomly booked, full price, no alerts. I want the raw experience. As an unknown face. Marianne shifted in her seat. You know you're not exactly low profile. Jalen, someone will recognize you. Not if I do it right. He stood and paced slowly. I won't be Jalen Cross. I'll be Jonathan Pace, freelance consultant, flying to conferences, worn jeans, no watch, no suit, no baggage tag that screams CEO. The CTO chuckled nervously. That's bold. The CFO frowned. It's risky. Marianne didn't say anything at first. She just studied him. He turned toward her. What do you think I think? She said after a beat. You won't like everything you see. Jalen smiled. That's the point. That night, after most had gone home, he stayed behind, alone in his office, lights dimmed, jazz playing softly from an old speaker. He started planning. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and listed everything he would leave behind. Designer briefcase, monogrammed cufflinks, VIP priority status, known traveler number, gone. He texted his daughter, Raina, going incognito for a few days. Her reply came fast. Please don't get kicked off your own plane. He smiled and typed. Only if they forget the biscotti. Ha, be safe. Mom says you're being extra dramatic. He stared at the screen for a moment, then set the phone down. His ex-wife always had a way of distilling his decisions into theater. Maybe she was right. He walked to the tall mirror in the side hallway, looked at himself, the tailored suit, the polished shoes, the man who had spent years fighting to be taken seriously in rooms built to exclude him. Could he let go of all that he thought of his father again? The old pilot uniform still hung in the back of his closet. Blue fabric faded, brass buttons dulled by time, but still intact. It had flown domestic routes in the 1980s when being a black pilot meant constant second-guessing and coded remarks. His father never raised his voice, never asked for respect. He earned it, flight by flight, minute by minute. Jalen whispered to the room, time for me to earn it again. The next morning, he packed light, a plain black backpack, 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a beat-up paperback on leadership through humility, and his father's old Timex. He booked his flights without corporate channels, used a basic Gmail account, no TSA pre-check. He wanted to feel the friction. The first flight would be from Denver to Chicago. The second, Miami to Dallas. The third, Phoenix to Salt Lake City. 3 different crews. 3 different experiences. As he zipped up his bag, a flicker of nervousness surprised him. It had been years since he traveled without someone managing the details. No assistant, no priority boarding, no protective bubble. This time, he would walk the same halls, sit in the same cramped seats, wait in the same long lines, and maybe, just maybe, find the truth waiting in those in-between moments. He took one last look at the polished CEO in the mirror, then took off the watch, rolled up his sleeves, and stepped into the rain. The airport bathroom mirror was harsh, too bright, too sterile. Jalen Cross stood there studying his own reflection, one hand holding a disposable razor, the other gripping the edge of the counter like he needed it to stay grounded. He had already shaved off the neat goatee that was practically a signature in business magazines. Without it, he looked 10 years younger and surprisingly unfamiliar. His skin still carried the quiet pride of heritage, the smooth tone his mother used to call almond dusk, but his eyes, today, looked older, more alert, more tired. He adjusted the angle of the mirror and frowned. His usual perfectly pressed collar was gone, replaced by a wrinkled, checkered shirt he had bought from a thrift store near Buckhead. He wore faded jeans, gray New Balance sneakers, and a weather-worn backpack slung over one shoulder. In his chest pocket, he had tucked the old Timex his father used to wear in the cockpit, the watch still ticking like an old friend. He was no longer the CEO of Everreach Air. He was Jonathan Pace, freelance consultant, heading to Salt Lake City for a quiet weekend of workshops on leadership and change. A forgettable traveler with a forgettable life. He took a breath, then another, then stepped out into the terminal, blending into the noise of dragging suitcases and boarding calls. As he made his way toward Gate B-19, he kept his head low but his ears open. Every interaction around him became a note. Every tone, every pause, every glance. At the security checkpoint, the TSA agent barely looked at him. No smile, no eye contact. His ID was scanned and handed back like a receipt. Next, the agent called out before Jalen had even zipped up his bag. He passed through the scanner, stepped into his shoes, and moved on. Nothing hostile, but something missing. Humanity. Maybe. He made a mental note. The terminal smelled of cinnamon pretzels and coffee that had sat on burners too long. Children cried in the distance. A businessman argued with someone on Bluetooth. A janitor hummed a song Jalen couldn't place, but somehow remembered from childhood. He liked this part of the airport, the in-between. It reminded him of flying with his father as a child. The way they'd sit at the window and name each plane by its tail logo. The way his father, in uniform, always kept his head high despite the stares. He smiled briefly at the memory. At the gate, the boarding process had already begun. Group 1 may board now, the agent said without enthusiasm. Jalen, in Group 4, stood off to the side. A few people had noticed him, maybe wondering why a tall black man in his 50s looked like he belonged in first class but stood among tourists and students. One couple glanced twice, then looked away. He kept his expression blank. That was the trick to invisibility. Show nothing. When his group was called, he approached with his boarding pass ready. The gate agent scanned it, then paused. Sir, your seat is in the back. she said, pointing vaguely. I know, he replied politely. She nodded, but didn't smile. Row 32B, middle seat, the most democratic seat on the plane. No privilege, no space, just a lesson in patience and posture. As he approached the row, he saw the woman in the aisle seat already settled in. Late 50s, beige pantsuit, typing furiously on a tablet. Her eyes flicked up. "Excuse me," he said. She stood stiffly, barely looking at him as he slid past and into the narrow space. The boy in the window seat, maybe early 20s, was already lost in a game on his phone. Giant headphones sealed off his world. Jalen smiled slightly. He pulled out his journal and pen. Not the tablet, not the laptop, just ink and paper. He liked the quiet scratch of thoughts made visible. He started to write. Flight 1823, Phoenix to Salt Lake City. Plane appears clean, crew tone neutral, gate agent cold, gate boarding announcement robotic. Uniforms crisp but lack warmth, no greeting at entrance. Then he heard the voices behind him. Those voices, the ones that would freeze him an hour later. But not yet, not now, not in this moment. Now he was still just Jonathan Pace, tired traveler. The flight attendant passed by with a plastic smile. Blonde, mid-30s, her name tag read Marla. Anything to drink, she asked without stopping. Coffee, please. She nodded, handed him a small cup, and moved on. No eye contact, no warmth. He took a sip and immediately regretted it. Bitter, burnt. He winced but kept drinking. He didn't need perfection. He needed truth. The woman next to him muttered something under her breath. "Excuse me," Jalen asked, turning slightly. She blinked, realizing he had heard, "Oh, nothing. Just these airlines. Everything's gotten so impersonal, hasn't it?" Jalen considered this. Maybe. Or maybe people just stopped noticing the people trying. She looked at him with mild surprise. He smiled faintly, then turned back to his journal. From the corner of his eye, he saw her adjust her posture. Just a little. He wrote again. Passengers seemed disengaged. Not angry, not rude, just drifting. Like everyone's in their own little world, including the crew. He paused. Maybe that was the issue, not the failures, but the absences. No hellish service, no great kindness either. Just gray space. 1,000 tiny moments where someone could choose to see, to listen, to care, and didn't. That was what bothered him most. As the flight continued, he watched interactions, listened, took notes, observed how an elderly man was helped with his bag by another passenger, not the crew, how a toddler cried for 10 minutes before anyone offered the mother a napkin or juice, how everyone seemed to wait for someone else to step up. Jalen looked down at his own hands, strong, capable. He had built an empire with these hands. But in this seat, in this moment, he was just another name on a manifest. And maybe that was exactly what he needed to be. He turned to the window. The sun had begun to set, casting a pink-orange glow over the clouds. For a second, everything felt still. And then came the voices, the two men behind him. You see the Brandon trying so hard to look premium, but the inside's budget. I heard the CEO's some big diversity hire. Typical. Jalen blinked. A slow burn rose in his chest, but he didn't turn. Not yet. He closed his journal and waited. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft ding. Passengers shifted in their seats. Some reached for phones, others for headphones or snacks. The flight was cruising smoothly now at 35,000 feet, but Jalen Cross felt like the cabin was floating somewhere between discomfort and disconnection. He'd not written another word since closing his journal. The voices behind him still lingered in the air, not loud, not obscene, just casual. And that casualness is what made them cut deeper, like background music you do not realize is offensive until you listen to the lyrics. Trevor Langston's voice had a familiar smugness, the kind Jalen had heard 1,000 times in high-level meetings, always masked with handshakes and phrases like "you people" and "qualified diversity hires." Neil Carver, the man next to Trevor, seemed quieter, more hesitant. Occasionally, he mumbled things that sounded like agreement, but Jalen could tell he wasn't fully on board. He was following, not leading. Jalen crossed his arms, pretending to stretch, but, in truth, he was anchoring himself. His instinct told him to speak, to say something sharp, professional, measured. But every time he opened his mouth in his mind, it felt like falling into a trap. What if they recognized him? What if it created a scene? What if it made the crew suspicious? Distracted from their duties, would he be escalating or educating? Was it pride, or was it purpose? A soft voice broke through his thoughts. "You fly often." It was the woman next to him, Elise Durham. She had not spoken since boarding. She held a half-finished crossword puzzle in one hand and a pen in the other. Her tone was polite, curious, not intrusive. "Sometimes." Jalen answered after a beat. "Work trips, conferences." She nodded, her eyes scanning his face as if trying to place him. "Consultant." He smiled faintly. "Something like that." "Well, I'm retired now," she said, lowering the puzzle. "But I spent 25 years in HR. Flew all the time. Different airlines. You start to notice the patterns." "Patterns?" Jalen asked. "The good ones say hello. The best ones mean it. That's my test." Jalen chuckled. "That's a good one." She smiled, but her eyes softened. "You seem like someone who notices things, too." He looked at her more closely. Her face had the quiet confidence of someone who had mediated arguments, written policies, maybe even hired and fired. She was watching him with gentle intuition. He nodded. "I notice more than I say. Most smart people do." Their conversation paused as the flight attendants rolled out the snack cart. Jalen watched as Marla, the same blonde attendant from earlier, moved mechanically down the aisle. She offered drinks and pretzels, never making real eye contact. When she reached their row, she gave a polite smile but did not linger. "Something to drink?" she asked. "Just water," Elise said. "Same," Jalen added. Marla handed them the plastic cups and moved on. Elise sipped, then leaned slightly toward Jalen. "That's a 2-second interaction that tells you everything." He looked at her. "You think she's checked out?" "No," she replied thoughtfully. "I think she's disappointed. You can tell when someone started this job with love and slowly lost it. This flight, this crew, they feel underseen, like they're going through the motions." Jalen blinked, impressed. She was right. Elise settled back in her seat. "Used to be, flight attendants were the face of the airline. Now, they carry the weight of it without the grace." He scribbled a quick note in the corner of his journal. "When employees feel invisible, service becomes survival." The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing clear skies and a smooth landing expected in Salt Lake City. Jalen barely heard it, because the voices behind him were getting louder. "I'm telling you," Trevor said with a laugh, These airlines throw a black face on an ad and think they're changing the world. You saw that guy in the commercial Neil asked, the one walking through the hangar like he owns it. Trevor laughed again. Exactly. Please. We know he doesn't run the place. It's all for show. Neil hesitated. I think that actually is the CEO. Trevor scoffed. Yeah, right. You ever heard of a black CEO running a major airline? Jalen's jaw clenched. He stared straight ahead, breathing evenly. His heart thudded like muffled drums. Not rage, not shame. Something deeper, something cold and rooted. Elise turned to him again, a hint of concern in her eyes. You okay? He didn't answer right away. He could feel his palms sweating. He had faced senators in closed-door hearings, had negotiated with hostile investors, had stood on stages with lights blinding his vision. But this was different. This was being erased by people who did not even know they were holding the pen. I'm fine, he said finally. Elise didn't press, but she did not look away for a long moment. The boy by the window, Micah, stirred. He removed his headphones and looked around sleepily. You guys hear that dude behind us? He whispered to Jalen. Jalen blinked. What do you mean, just that guy? Talking like he owns everything, saying weird stuff. Jalen offered a neutral nod. Micah pulled his phone out and started texting. The flight attendants continued their pass. Jalen noted the way Damon Reese, the other crew member, barely acknowledged the passengers. His tie was crooked, and he moved like someone trying to finish the shift before a final warning. Elise whispered again. I used to believe silence was wise. Now, I think it's often just fear wearing a suit. Jalen turned his head slowly toward her. The words hit harder than she probably intended. He glanced again at the call button. He could ask to speak to the crew. He could hand them a card. He could say, that man behind me is talking about your leadership, about who belongs here. Or he could wait and let them keep talking, because the truth was unfolding. He did not need to fight for it. He just needed to witness it. The plane began its gradual descent. Outside, the Utah mountains appeared like bruises against the horizon. Pale blue light cut through the window, casting long shadows across the cabin. Passengers stirred from naps, adjusted trays, gathered wrappers, but Jalen Cross was still as stone. He had not moved in 10 minutes. The words behind him had changed shape. They were not just ignorant anymore. They were cruel. Trevor had doubled down. I mean, let's be honest. Trevor was saying, you give someone the job because of what they look like, not because they earned it, and this is what you get. Second-rate service, overpaid executives, and a bunch of social media noise. Come on, Trev, Neil muttered. You don't know his qualifications. I don't have to. Look at the results. You seen the Forbes list. The dude got there fast. Too fast. That's what I'm saying. Jalen's pulse throbbed at his temple. Too fast. That phrase always lingered like a stain. He had spent 20 years flying planes, logging thousands of hours, teaching others to do the same. 10 years building Everreach Air from a startup into a competitor, sacrificing weekends, missing birthdays, absorbing every setback like a shield to protect the dream. And now, two strangers who knew nothing of him had decided that none of it was real. He was not angry. He was grieving. Elise Durham sensed the shift. You look like someone deciding something big, she said gently. He looked at her. I am care to share. Jalen hesitated. You ever have a moment where silence feels like betrayal? All the time. she said without pause. He nodded slowly. I think I'm done being invisible. Elise gave a faint smile. Then say something. You don't need to be loud, just true. Jalen turned his eyes forward. He thought about his daughter Raina, about what kind of world she would walk into, about whether silence was protection or a lesson in surrender. Then the intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Salt Lake City. Please ensure your seat backs and tray tables are upright and locked. The cabin became busy with movements and adjustments. Micah plugged his headphones back in. Elise tucked away her crossword. Marla passed down the aisle, checking seatbelts without much effort. Damon Reese followed behind her with even less engagement. Trevor and Neil kept talking. Now it was about immigration. Jalen stopped listening. Instead, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. On it was the original blueprint for Everreach's core values. He had written it a decade ago on a napkin during a layover in Minneapolis and later typed it up as the founding manifesto. Empathy, dignity, accountability, visibility. He stared at the words, tracing the ink with his thumb. He glanced up and caught Damon standing nearby. "Excuse me," Jalen said quietly. Damon blinked, surprised. "Yes, sir, can I ask you something?" Sure." Jalen leaned in slightly. "Have you ever heard something that made you want to speak up, but you didn't know if it was your place?" Damon's brow furrowed. "Yeah, a few times." Jalen nodded. "What did you do?" "Honestly, I didn't speak. I wanted to, but I didn't. Why not?" Damon looked down. "Because I thought it wouldn't matter." Jalen paused, then reached into his journal. He pulled out a card. Not a business card. A quote card he had once made for new employees during orientation. On one side, speak even if your voice shakes. On the other, the culture you tolerate is the culture you live in. He handed it to Damon without another word. The young flight attendant stared at it for a moment, confused, then looked back at Jalen. Something passed between them, a thread of recognition, not identity, integrity. Damon stepped back slowly, tucking the card into his pocket. The seatbelt sign turned back on with a chime. The engines began to hum lower as the plane angled slightly downward. Jalen leaned back and exhaled. His hands trembled, just a little, not from nerves, from something deeper, a readiness, a return. Elise turned her head toward him. "Did you do it? I started," he said. "Sometimes that's enough." The city came into view. Salt Lake shimmered under the fading sun, a mix of silver roads and terracotta rooftops. The runway glinted in the distance like a line of promise. As the wheels touched down with a subtle jolt, the passengers clapped half-heartedly. Jalen did not. He was already planning what would come next. The pilot's voice came over the speakers. "Welcome to Salt Lake City. Folks, please remain seated until we've reached the gate." Jalen sat quietly as the plane taxied. He was rehearsing the moment he would stand, turn, look those men in the eye, not to scold, not to argue, but to simply exist in full view. As the plane rolled to a stop and the seatbelt sign turned off, everyone leapt into motion. Overhead, bins popped open, bags were pulled down, conversations resumed. Jalen stayed seated. He watched Trevor and Neil stand, stretch, laugh. He stood slowly. Trevor turned slightly and glanced at him, clearly not recognizing who he was. Then Jalen stepped into the aisle, positioned between them and the exit. "Excuse me." Trevor said casually, trying to push past. Jalen didn't move. He looked directly at them. You know, it's a strange thing to build something with your hands and then hear someone reduce it to a joke. Trevor blinked. I'm sorry, Jalen continued, his voice calm. You were talking about Everreach Air. The snacks, the uniforms, the Black CEO. Trevor's face paled slightly. We were just talking. Everyone talks. Yes, Jalen said, stepping slightly aside so others could pass. But when you talk, you reveal what you see and what you don't. Neil shifted uncomfortably. Look, we didn't mean. Jalen held up a hand. I'm not here to argue. I just wanted you to know the man you described is real, and he's listening. He walked past them. He did not need applause. He did not need an audience. But as he reached the door, Damon was waiting. Mr. Cross, he said quietly. Jalen turned. Damon nodded, his eyes steady now. Thank you. Jalen gave him a look of understanding, then stepped into the jet bridge, leaving the two men in stunned silence. The storm had passed, but the sky would not forget. Salt Lake City. International Airport was unusually quiet. The gate's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as passengers from Flight 1823 dispersed into the terminal like drops of water on warm pavement. Families clustered. Solo travelers stared at phones. The occasional echo of rolling luggage filled the air. Jalen Cross stood just beyond the jet bridge, motionless for a few moments. He watched people move around him, unaware, uncaring. He was invisible again, and, for the first time in days, it did not feel like hiding. It felt like clarity. He looked back toward the gate. The crew was beginning to deboard. Damon Reese stepped out last. Their eyes met briefly. Damon gave a small nod, then turned away to collect the final items from the cart. There was something new in his posture. A weight lifted, or maybe a decision made. Jalen turned and walked slowly down the concourse. He had a connection in 2 hours, no meetings, no press, no team waiting to debrief, just time and silence. He found a quiet bench near a wide window, set down his backpack, and sat. The mountains rose in the distance, their ridges dusted with snow even in spring. He pulled out his journal and opened to a fresh page. Salt Lake arrival, words cut deeper when wrapped in laughter, Elisa's wisdom, Damon's shift, Trevor's face when I spoke. He paused, then wrote something slower. Today, I did not build a company. I built a mirror. He leaned back, eyes scanning the people moving through the terminal. An older black couple walked by hand in hand. Smiling, a young Latina mother gently rocked her crying baby. An Asian teen in a hoodie helped his grandmother with her scarf. Tiny acts of care happening quietly. This was the world his company served. Not stats, not segments, people. A voice interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Cross. He turned. It was Damon, out of uniform now, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. The same face, but younger somehow, less burdened. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Jalen said, surprised. You're off duty. Just finished. I saw you sitting and thought, maybe I should say something. Jalen nodded and gestured to the bench. Damon sat beside him, fidgeting slightly. He seemed nervous. I didn't know it was you until you gave me that card. You handled it well, Jalen said gently. I froze, Damon admitted. I heard those guys the whole flight, every word, and I kept thinking, say something, step in. But I didn't. Jalen let the silence breathe, then said, You're not alone. Most people don't. I guess I kept asking myself, what if I speak up and it makes things worse? What if they complain and I lose my job? You wouldn't be the first. Damon looked down. Is that the price of doing what's right now? Jalen turned to face him. No, the real price is paid when we do nothing and let it grow. Damon nodded slowly. You built something incredible, and I let people mock it. You didn't mock it. You froze. There's a difference. They sat for a moment, the quiet around them more honest than words. Finally, Damon said, Can I ask you something else? Go ahead. Why didn't you blow up at them? You could have shut them down in one sentence. Jalen smiled faintly. I could have, but that would have been about me. And my ego, not the problem. Damon looked puzzled. Sometimes, Jalen continued, the most powerful thing you can do is listen fully. Let people show who they are, not for revenge, for understanding. So, you let them talk so you could understand the truth? No. I let them talk so they couldn't hide from it later. Damon sat back, letting that sink in. A family passed by, their 2 kids bouncing with energy. Jalen watched them, then turned back to Damon. Do you like your job? I used to. I still want to, but it's hard to care when no one around you seems to. Then be the first to care again. You'd be surprised how fast that spreads. Damon gave a slow nod. Thank you, really. Not just for what you said, for not giving up. Jalen stood and extended his hand. Next time, you won't freeze. That's enough. Damon shook his hand firmly. I won't. As Damon left, Jalen sat back down. He opened his phone and typed out a message. To Marianne Fielding, subject, crew debrief flight, 1823, request, one-on-one meeting with Damon Reese. Cabin crew, quiet potential, worth investment. He paused, then added another line. Also, initiate quiet audit on internal crew culture, not just performance. Tone, morale, leadership gaps. Listen deeply. He hit send. The sun had dipped lower. Shadows now stretched across the floor. His phone buzzed. Raina. You good, Dad? He smiled. Better than good. He typed back. Met someone brave today. Might have just saved our culture. She replied with a heart emoji and a gif of a cartoon airplane dancing. He laughed softly, then looked back at the mountains. The world outside seemed still, but he felt something moving inside. A shift. He had come undercover to see what was broken. He had found something even more valuable, someone ready to rebuild. And in that moment, Jalen realized this trip was not just a test of his company, it was a test of himself, and he had not come back with disappointment. He had come back with direction. The quiet of the executive lounge was different from the terminal. Softer, polished, as if the air had been filtered not just for dust, but discomfort. Jalen Cross stepped into the Everreach Elite Lounge not as the CEO, but still undercover. Jonathan Pace, consultant, tired traveler with a 2-hour layover and a slowly churning heart. The receptionist smiled at him with the reflex of someone who smiled for a living. Welcome, sir. Boarding pass, please. He handed it over, keeping his gaze neutral. She scanned it, typed something, and nodded. You're all set. Coffee and snacks are to your right. Lounge seating just beyond the divider. Thank you, he said quietly. He walked past, eyes open. Every movement around him was a brushstroke in a larger picture. Businessmen typing furiously. 2 flight attendants off duty whispering over iced teas. A middle-aged woman flipping through a travel magazine while her phone rang unanswered beside her. He took a seat in the far corner near a power outlet and a window overlooking the tarmac. Aircraft glided by slowly, as if afraid to disturb the silence. Jalen pulled out his journal, but this time he didn't write. He just listened. To the small sighs, the casual laughter, the low hum of a world moving politely but not always kindly. Then, just over the gentle lounge music, he heard a voice that made him pause. "I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything's fine." It came from behind the partition, a woman's voice, tight with exhaustion. He could not see her, but he could feel the weight of what she carried in her tone. Another voice answered. A man this time. "You're one of the best supervisors they've got. Why not talk to someone, because every time I speak up, it becomes about my tone, my attitude, not the point I'm making." Jalen remained still. The woman continued. "Crew morale is collapsing. We have flight leads covering 3 shifts in a row. One of our gate agents cried in the bathroom last week, and the only response we get is, 'Be grateful you still have a job.'" The man sighed. "It's not just us. It's everywhere. Maybe, but we said we were different." Jalen's breath caught. He stood slowly and walked casually around the corner, careful not to appear intrusive. There they were, a woman in her 40s with tightly curled hair pulled into a bun, Everreach badge on her lanyard. Her uniform jacket was folded over the chair beside her. Across from her sat a crew lead with tired eyes and scuffed shoes. They saw him and straightened reflexively. "Sorry," the woman said quickly. "We didn't mean to be loud." Jalen offered a kind smile. "You weren't loud, just honest." She blinked, caught off guard. "I'm Jonathan," he added, extending a hand. "Consultant. I listen for a living." The man shook his hand first. "Aaron." The woman followed, more cautious. "Tennille, you said something back there," Jalen said gently. "That felt important, about pretending." Tennille looked at Aaron. He gave a small nod, giving her permission to speak freely. Tennille folded her hands, hesitant at first. "I've been with Everreach for 7 years. I joined because I believed it stood for something more than just flying people from point A to point B. But lately, it feels like we're eroding from the inside." Jalen sat across from them, notepad still closed. "Go on," he said. Tennille glanced around the lounge, lowered her voice. "There's been a shift, less communication, more pressure. They cut 3 gate support roles last month, so now we're short every evening. And when we try to raise it, it gets turned into a personality issue." Aaron added quietly, "We're tired. And when you're tired in this job, mistakes happen, ones you can't undo." Tennille looked up again. "I don't want to leave. I want to help fix it. But I feel invisible. And lately, like no one's listening." Jalen nodded slowly. What would it take to feel seen again? Tennille blinked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. Someone who actually has a say needs to hear us. Not just surveys or HR reps. Someone who makes decisions. Someone who remembers why this place was started. Jalen felt her words like a direct pulse to his chest. He hesitated, then asked, "And if that person listened, truly listened, would you stay in a heartbeat?" Aaron added. "Same." Jalen glanced at his watch. It was his father's Timex, still ticking. "Would you mind if I bought you both a coffee?" They looked at each other, surprised. Sure," Tennille said slowly. He stood, nodded, and walked over to the coffee station, heart racing. He'd come looking for broken policies. Instead, he had found broken spirits, And yet, they weren't beyond repair. They still had hope tucked under the fatigue, loyalty hidden beneath the silence. If nurtured, it could turn everything. As he returned with the cups, he set one down in front of Tennille. "To dignity," he said simply. She tilted her head, unsure. Jalen sat down and smiled softly. "Do me a favor. In a few days, when you get a message requesting feedback from leadership, speak freely. You'll know it came from someone who was listening." Aaron frowned slightly. "Wait, are you—" Jalen's eyes held theirs. Warm, clear, unflinching. "Let's just say I've been closer to this than you think." Tanila's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition. She had seen him once in a training video. She gasped quietly, "Oh my God." Jalen lifted his cup in a small toast, not pretending anymore. Tanila's hands trembled slightly, then stilled. She raised her cup. So did Aaron. They clinked glasses with the softest tap. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like just coffee. It felt like something beginning again. Jalen Cross stepped into the guest bathroom of his hotel suite and closed the door behind him. The mirror reflected a man who no longer looked like a stranger. His disguise was thinning, not in clothing or demeanor, but in spirit. Every step of this journey had chipped away the distance between who he pretended to be and who he truly was. Now, the two stood nearly eye to eye. He ran water into the sink, splashed it over his face, then stared into the glass. The silence of the room wrapped around him like a cloak. He had thought this trip would confirm things, patch holes in data, reveal operational cracks, maybe find a few staff to reward quietly, and a few to correct with grace. But it was more than that. This wasn't about metrics anymore. It was about a truth too big for reports. People were drifting, not in revolt, not yet, but in resignation. The spark that had once fueled Everreach, the sense of being part of something purposeful, was flickering out in too many places, and he, its founder, had somehow become too far removed to see it from the boardroom. He dried his hands and walked into the main room. The TV was on mute, playing a loop of headlines. He didn't look at it. Instead, he picked up his phone and dialed. It rang twice. Then a voice answered. "Marianne Fielding." "It's me," Jalen said softly. A pause. Then her tone changed. More alert, more concerned. "Jalen, you're still undercover." "Yes, but I'm stepping out of the shadows soon. I need a few things in motion before I do." "All right. What do you need?" "First," he said, pacing slowly, "I want a full-staff climate audit, not the PR version. Anonymous, third-party, raw feedback, no filters. Understood. Second, I want to meet with the 10 lowest-rated team leads across all hubs. Privately, off the record. That'll raise eyebrows. I don't care. If they're drowning, I want to know what's pulling them under." "Okay." "Third," he said, stopping at the window, "I want to refly Flight 1823 next week. Same crew, but this time as myself." There was a pause. "You think that's wise, I think it's necessary." He hung up after a few more instructions, then let the quiet return. As he looked out at the Salt Lake skyline, the clouds gathering in the distance reminded him of something his mother once said. "When you feel a storm rising, don't run. Step outside and raise your eyes. Let it know you see it." He closed his eyes for a moment and breathed in deeply. He still had work to do. The next morning, Jalen walked into the Everreach regional office near the airport unannounced. It was a modest space reception area, a few shared offices, and a break room with a microwave that probably hadn't been cleaned in weeks. The receptionist, a young woman named Jada, looked up and blinked rapidly when she recognized him. "Mr. Cross," he offered a small nod and smile. "I'm just here to observe. No fanfare. Of course, sir. Would you like coffee? Just a tour, and maybe a conversation with whoever's leading crew scheduling today?" Within minutes, word spread, not the announcement of his arrival, but the whispers. The CEO is here, not on a call, not on a poster, in person, and not wearing a suit. Some people froze, some avoided eye contact. Others watched with a mixture of curiosity and unease. He didn't mind. He didn't want performance. He wanted truth. In the scheduling office, he met a woman named Priya. Her desk was covered in sticky notes, 2 monitors flashing with alerts and assignments. Her eyes were tired but sharp. "I didn't expect this," she said honestly. "I didn't either," Jalen replied, "but here we are." She motioned to a seat. He asked about her team, her workload, the things she wished leadership understood, and she told him about burnout, about being short 3 coordinators for 6 weeks, about policy changes that came via email without context or consultation, and about the time last month when a junior scheduler had a panic attack and no one even followed up the next day. Jalen listened, took notes, asked real questions, not to fix everything in that moment, but to honor her truth. Afterward, he walked the halls, paused by the break room, stopped to chat with a janitor named Alonzo, who had been with the company longer than some of the managers. "You ever feel like no one's looking down here?" Jalen asked him. Alonzo laughed. "I assume I'm invisible until someone complains about the trash." Jalen nodded. "Well, I see you, and I appreciate what you do." Alonzo stared at him, then nodded slowly, as if that one sentence had shifted something inside him. By mid-afternoon, Jalen returned to the hotel. He sat by the window again, watching the runways, aircraft touching down, taking off, so many lives in transit, so many stories in motion. He opened his journal. Rebuilding does not begin with strategies. It begins with attention, the kind that listens before it speaks. He underlined the word listens. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He answered, "Mr. Cross." "This is Tanile. I hope this isn't a bad time." "Not at all. I wanted to say thank you again. After we talked, I went back to the team and shared a bit of what happened. Nothing specific, just that we were seen. You'd be surprised what that did to the room." "I'm not surprised," he said quietly. "There's still a lot to fix," she added, "but it feels less lonely now." He let her words sit in the space between them. Then he said, "Let me ask you something. Tanile, if I gave you a seat at the table where decisions get made, no politics, no filters, would you take it?" She was silent for a second. Then, in a heartbeat, "Good, because I'm building a new advisory team, real people, from the floor, not titles, voices. Count me in." As the call ended, Jalen stared at the empty page across from his notes. It was time to write a new chapter, and this time he would not write it alone. The morning sun spilled through the curtains of Jalen Cross's hotel room, casting long streaks of gold across the cluttered desk. He sat there, eyes fixed on the flight itinerary displayed on his laptop. Today was the day. Flight 1823, the final leg of his undercover journey, but this time, as himself. No disguise, no pretense, The quiet in the room pressed in on him. His thoughts raced and circled like planes waiting for clearance. Questions echoed. Doubt whispered. Was this the right move? Could he handle the fallout if passengers or crew recognized him? Would it be seen as a stunt or a sincere act? And what if the confrontation he'd begun yesterday escalated beyond control? He rubbed his temples, a dull ache reminding him that leadership was never simple. Then his phone buzzed a message from Raina. "Proud of you. Just be you." A small smile cracked his serious expression. He stood, dressed deliberately in a sharp navy blazer and crisp shirt, the attire of the CEO, yet something more grounded. No thick glasses this time, no attempt to blend in. He was ready to face whatever came. The ride to the airport was smooth. The driver's playlist a low hum in the background. Jalen stared out the window as the city's familiar skyline gave way to the bustling airport terminals. This place had been a battleground and a dream for decades, and now it was the stage for a reckoning. At check-in, he presented his real credentials. The agent, a young woman named Carla, scanned them and looked up, eyebrows lifting. "Mr. Cross, welcome back. We're honored to have you fly with us." Jalen nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Thank you, Carla." She smiled genuinely, handing him his boarding pass. Seat 12A, business class. He noticed the subtle shift in tone recognition mixed with respect. But he was not here for comfort. As he proceeded through security, he caught glimpses of familiar faces, employees, crew members, even some passengers he'd met on his undercover flights. He waved quietly to Tanila, who gave a small nod. No words needed. Boarding began, and Jalen found himself settling into seat 12A. The plush leather, a stark contrast to the cramped economy seats he'd endured. But his mind was elsewhere. Behind him, a man and woman chatted quietly. The new CEO flying himself. Bold move. I heard he's trying to change things from the inside out. Wonder if it'll work. Jalen's jaw tightened. Bold or foolish? He knew it was necessary. As the plane pushed back, the familiar pre-flight announcements filled the cabin. Jalen observed every detail, the attentive way the crew interacted, the subtle gestures of care and professionalism. This was the airline he had built, yet the reality was more complex than any report could capture. Halfway through the flight, a commotion rippled near the rear of the cabin. Jalen rose, instincts sharp, and moved towards the disturbance. Two passengers, a middle-aged couple, were in a heated exchange with a flight attendant. Voices were raised. The woman accused the crew of discrimination. The man demanded to see the manager. Jalen stepped in calmly. "Is there a problem I can help with?" The flight attendant turned, eyes wide. "This passenger is upset about seat assignments," she explained quietly. Jalen nodded, then faced the passengers. "May I ask what the concern is?" The woman's voice was trembling. "We requested seats together months ago. We were separated, and the crew has been dismissive." Jalen looked at the attendant, then back to the couple. "Let me see what I can do." He spoke with the lead flight attendant, then returned with a solution. The couple was moved closer together, and the flight attendant offered sincere apologies. As peace returned, Jalen felt the weight of the moment. This was more than service, it was dignity restored. Returning to his seat, he noticed a familiar figure approaching Damon Reese, the flight attendant who had begun to find his voice. "Mr. Cross," Damon said softly, "I wanted to thank you for what you did yesterday, and to say I'm committed to doing better." Jalen smiled. "That means everything." They talked quietly about the importance of leadership and accountability. Damon shared frustrations and hopes. Jalen listened, offering encouragement. But the flight was not without its shadows. Later, as Jalen reviewed his notes, he overheard a conversation behind him. "I still don't get why we're flying this route instead of Delta," one passenger muttered. "Because it's cheaper," the other replied. "Black-owned airlines always have to cut corners to survive." The words landed like a slap. Jalen's hands clenched. This was the very prejudice he'd come to confront. He debated turning, speaking out, but paused. Instead, he took a deep breath and reached for his notebook. He began writing a letter, not just to his critics, but to every passenger who doubted, every employee who felt unseen, every leader who feared change. Excellence is not just in what we deliver, it's in who we are and how we stand. As the plane descended into Atlanta, Jalen felt a fierce resolve settle over him. This was no longer just a business, it was a mission. The Atlanta airport was alive with the usual pulse of arrivals and departures, a constant hum that blended announcements, footsteps, and the murmur of thousands moving through terminals. Jalen Cross moved steadily through the crowd, his mind still racing from the flight. The mission was far from over. The trip had revealed much, but the real test awaited back home. He hailed a cab, the evening sky turning a deep violet behind the skyscrapers as the vehicle wove through familiar streets. The city seemed unchanged, but Jalen felt different, more exposed yet more determined. As he entered the towering glass building of Everreach headquarters, the reception area felt colder than usual. The sterile brightness of the space seemed at odds with the warmth he longed to restore within these walls. He nodded at the security guard and made his way toward the elevators. On the ride up, Jalen's thoughts drifted to his father, a man whose legacy was both a source of pride and a reminder of the battles yet to fight. His father had taught him that leadership was not just about success, but about responsibility to those you lead. The elevator dinged open to the executive floor, where Marianne Fielding was waiting. Her expression was tight, but open a reflection of the challenges they both faced. "Jalen," she greeted, "we've prepared a detailed report from the anonymous staff survey you requested." He took the folder from her hands, flipping through pages filled with raw, unfiltered feedback, comments about burnout, communication breakdowns, and fractured morale. But beneath the complaints, there were also stories of loyalty and hope, voices yearning to be heard. "This confirms what we suspected," Jalen said quietly. "It's a culture problem, not just operational." Marianne nodded. "We're drafting a plan to address it, but it'll require real commitment from the entire leadership team." "We'll get it," Jalen promised. "But first, I want to meet with the staff advisory group you're forming." Marianne smiled. "They're eager to start." The meeting room filled quickly with a diverse group: flight attendants, gate agents, schedulers, and ground crew. Faces worn but resolute. Jalen introduced himself plainly. "No airs, no grand speech. I'm here to listen," he said simply. "Tell me what you need to thrive, to believe in this company again." One by one, the staff spoke. Tanila Brooks recounted the exhaustion of double shifts and the sting of feeling invisible. Damon Reese spoke of small acts of kindness, often overshadowed by systemic issues. A young gate agent named Marcus shared stories of passenger interactions that both uplifted and tore down. Jalen absorbed every word, asking questions, clarifying, validating. The weight of their trust was heavy but invigorating. After hours, as the meeting adjourned, Jalen lingered with Tennille. "Thank you for speaking honestly," he said. She looked tired but hopeful. "We just want to know someone cares." "I do," he promised. Later that night, Jalen sat alone in his office. The city lights shimmered outside as he penned a letter to the entire Everreach family. "Dear team, I've spent the last several days walking in your shoes, listening to your stories, and witnessing the challenges you face. I am humbled and grateful for your courage and dedication. Together, we will rebuild our culture not from the top down, but from the heart out. Excellence is not just a goal. It is a commitment to every person who walks through our doors or boards our planes. It is a promise that no voice will be ignored, no struggle unseen. Thank you for your honesty, your strength, and your belief in what Everreach can become. Sincerely, Jalen Cross." He read the letter twice, then hit send. His phone buzzed immediately. A message from Raina. "Proud of you, Dad. You're making it real." Jalen smiled, then looked back at the city sprawling beneath him. The journey was far from over. There were storms to weather, bridges to build, and legacies to honor. But for the first time in a long while, he believed the dawn was breaking. The dawn light crept softly through the blinds of Jalen Cross's office. It was early, but his mind was already racing, fueled by the gravity of the path ahead. Today wasn't just any day. It was the day he would face his company, his critics, and himself with full transparency. The boardroom was quiet when he entered. His executive team sat around the long polished table, some nursing coffee, others scanning notes. Marianne gave him a nod of encouragement as he took his place at the head. "Thank you for coming early," Jalen began, voice steady but resolute. "The past week has been an eye-opening journey, not as CEO from behind the glass, but as a passenger, as a colleague, as one of you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I've seen the good, the bad, and the uncomfortable truth about where we stand as a company. Today, I want to share those insights openly, because silence and avoidance have never served us well." The room was still, eyes fixed on him. He started with stories, anecdotes from his undercover flights, the anxious mother, the attentive flight attendant Rosa, the exhausted supervisors like Tennille, and the moments of dismissal he witnessed. The raw voices of his employees and passengers. As he spoke, some faces reflected surprise, others shame, and a few wore expressions of understanding. Marianne leaned forward. "Jalen, your willingness to walk in their shoes is admirable. But the question is, what now?" Jalen nodded. "That's what this meeting's about. Our company is at a crossroads. We can keep doing what's easy patching problems, hiding discomfort, or we can choose real change." Darren Chen, the young marketing director, raised his hand. "How do you suggest we handle the public perception? The biases that are so deeply ingrained in some passengers' minds." Jalen's gaze sharpened. "We own it. We acknowledge the challenges of being a Black-owned airline in a space where perceptions matter. We don't hide. We don't deflect. We lead with transparency and with pride." Patricia, the CTO, added, and internally, "We need comprehensive training, not just sensitivity, but genuine cultural competence. Ongoing, real, impactful." James Washington, the seasoned investor. finally spoke from his corner. Leadership isn't easy, but you're showing us that courage is necessary. The discussion turned to action plans, concrete steps to improve staff morale, customer experience, and community engagement, a new advisory council, regular anonymous feedback loops, and a commitment to accountability. Jalen concluded, "We're not perfect. No company is. But we can be authentic. We can be better." Later that afternoon, as the boardroom emptied, Jalen found himself alone with Mary Ann. "Was it worth going undercover?" she asked softly. He considered the question more than I imagined. The truth can be painful, but it's also liberating. It's the foundation of real progress. She smiled. "I'm glad you came back with open eyes." He looked out the window at the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. The road ahead was long, but the first step had been taken. The conference room lights dimmed as the presentation came to a close. Jalen Cross stood before a crowd of Everreach employees gathered for the company's first town hall in years. The energy in the room was palpable, a mixture of anticipation, hope, and the raw vulnerability of a team ready for change. Jalen's voice was steady and warm as he addressed the group. "Today marks not just a new chapter for Everreach, but a new commitment, a commitment to listen, to learn, and to grow together." He paused, scanning the faces before him. Some nodded, others held tears. Every eye reflected a shared yearning for a better future. "Our journey has been challenging. We've faced criticism, internal struggles, and the weight of expectations not just as a company, but as a symbol of what it means to fly with dignity and pride." He took a breath, letting the gravity sink in. "But I want you to know this. We are more than the sum of our challenges. We are a family bound by a vision that transcends flights and schedules, a vision of inclusivity, excellence, and unwavering respect." The crowd erupted into applause. Jalen smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. After the session, he mingled with employees sharing stories, shaking hands, and embracing those who approached him. Tanela Brooks caught his eye from across the room. She smiled, her eyes brighter than when he first met her. "Feels different, doesn't it?" she said. "It does," Jalen agreed. Later, as the sun set over the Atlanta skyline, Jalen sat on the balcony of his office, reflecting on the past weeks, the undercover flights, the tough conversations, the moments of pain and triumph. It had all led here. His phone buzzed. A message from Tyler, the young graphic designer he'd met months earlier. "Just read about the town hall. Proud to see the change happening. If you need ideas for the in-flight magazine, you know where to find me." Jalen chuckled, typing a quick reply. "Will do. Tyler, thanks for believing." He looked up at the stars emerging in the night sky. For decades, the airline industry had been a tough sky to navigate, especially for a black man with a dream. But Jalen knew now that the true journey was just beginning. With courage, empathy, and a relentless commitment to truth, Everreach Air would soar higher than ever before. Because this airline was not just about flying planes, it was about lifting people together. Jalen Cross's journey is more than a story about an airline or a CEO flying undercover. It's a mirror held up to society, reflecting how deep-rooted biases still shape even the most ordinary moments, like boarding a plane or sharing a seat. His story reminds us that behind every act of discrimination is a call for dignity that cannot be ignored. It challenges us to stand firm, to listen deeply, and to act with empathy. We've seen how courage and compassion can transform not just a company, but the lives of every person who steps on board. But the fight against prejudice is ongoing, and every one of us has a role to play. Let Jalen's story inspire you to look beyond assumptions, to see people for who they truly are, and to demand justice in every corner of our world. If this story moved you, if it made you think, share it with others. Help us spread awareness and inspire change. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that speaks truth to power and heart to heart. Together, we can make every flight and every life a journey toward respect and equality.